What would you do if the past you escaped showed up at your front gate asking one question: why did you forget us? On a rainy afternoon in Westchester, a self-made black billionaire ordered her guards to remove two poor boys from her property. It should have been a routine security decision. But when the camera zoomed in on the sign they were holding, she realized this wasn't trespassing. It was a reckoning. And the empire she built to escape her past was about to collapse because of it. If you want maximum suspense and emotional pull, hook option 1 is the most cinematic. If you want psychological tension and reputation stakes, option 2 is strongest. If you want audience self-reflection and deeper engagement, option 3 builds a powerful emotional bridge. Cassandra Vail stood at the height of American influence, her name etched into skylines and financial journals with equal weight. In Manhattan's most guarded boardrooms, she was known as the Iron Architect, a woman who built cities the way generals commanded armies, strategically, unemotionally, without apology. Born to a struggling single mother in Detroit, she had climbed from subsidized housing to private jets through relentless discipline. Vail Infrastructure Group began as a dorm room proposal and evolved into a billion-dollar force in urban redevelopment. Every milestone reinforced her private conviction that sentiment was a liability. She believed she had escaped poverty not by waiting for compassion, but by refusing to depend on it. Her Westchester estate reflected that philosophy. Stone walls sealed the property from the outside world. Biometric gates granted access only to the authorized. Armed guards rotated in silent precision. Surveillance cameras ensured nothing entered unnoticed. The estate was less a home and more a declaration, proof that she would never again be vulnerable to instability. Even her philanthropy followed strict merit-based standards. Scholarships, tech incubators, mentorship initiatives, all structured around measurable performance. She invested in potential, not emotion. To her, compassion without discipline created dependency, and dependency destroyed ambition. On a gray, rain-soaked afternoon, two young black boys appeared at the edge of her gates holding a cardboard sign. Their presence disrupted the engineered calm of the estate. They were not shouting, not demanding entry, not causing a scene. They simply stood there, rain tracing lines down their faces, waiting with unsettling patience. Security reacted instantly, interpreting their presence as a threat to order. Protocol over curiosity. Removal over conversation. Inside the surveillance room, Cassandra observed through high-definition monitors. She did not recognize them immediately. All she saw were unknown variables standing too close to her perimeter. Without requesting context, she instructed her head of security, Grayson Holt, to escort them away and tighten the entry protocol. Her voice remained steady. The decision felt routine. As the guards guided the boys beyond the gate, one of them lifted the sign higher toward the nearest camera. The motion was deliberate, almost solemn. Cassandra's eyes fixed on the screen as the words became visible. "You promised you'd remember us." The sentence struck deeper than she expected. For a brief moment, her composure faltered. A memory surfaced: Redbrook Terrace, a neighborhood erased years ago under one of her first redevelopment contracts. She had not allowed herself to revisit it in years. Yet now the name echoed quietly in her mind. Security zoomed in further at her request. Taped to the corner of the sign was a faded photograph of three teenagers standing before a mural that read, "We rise together." One of them was unmistakably Cassandra, younger and unguarded. The other two faces mirrored the boys outside her gates. In that instant, Cassandra realized the past she had demolished might still be standing, waiting for her to answer. The image taped to the cardboard sign pulled Cassandra backward into a chapter of her life she had sealed away with contracts and capital. Redbrook Terrace had never appeared in her corporate biographies, yet it was the foundation beneath every achievement she claimed. The housing complex had been crumbling even during her childhood, its elevators unreliable, its walls marked by neglect. She had shared a single bedroom with her mother, learning early that privacy was a privilege and stability was temporary. Redbrook had shaped her resilience, but it had also shaped her silence. Among the few constants in that unstable environment was Elias Mercer. He had grown up in the adjacent building and carried himself with a steady calm that balanced Cassandra's restless ambition. When neighborhood tensions escalated or uncertainty filled the hallways, Elias positioned himself as a quiet shield, guiding younger kids home and diffusing conflicts before they grew dangerous. Cassandra once believed that if she ever escaped Redbrook, it would be because Elias believed she could. Together, they stood before a bright mural painted across one brick wall that read, "We rise together," and they made a pact that felt sacred in its simplicity. If one of them ever found a way out, they would come back and rebuild without pushing anyone aside. Years later, when Vale Infrastructure secured its first major redevelopment contract, Cassandra recognized the address immediately. Redbrook Terrace was slated for demolition, replaced by luxury condominiums and boutique retail space. She framed the project as progress, as revitalization, as proof that neglected spaces could become profitable again. Investors praised her decisiveness. Analysts called it visionary. Cassandra convinced herself that economic growth justified disruption. Residents received relocation packages structured to meet legal standards but little more. The community dispersed quietly, scattering into unfamiliar neighborhoods. Elias refused to relocate. He filed formal safety complaints as demolition schedules accelerated, arguing that the process endangered remaining tenants. Cassandra signed executive approvals that prioritized deadlines. She never visited the site during its final weeks. When news reached her that Elias had died during a building collapse after his warnings went unanswered, she absorbed the information in a boardroom and moved to the next agenda item. She did not attend his funeral. She told herself that distance was necessary for survival. Now Grayson Holt's report confirmed what the photograph suggested. The boys at her gate were Elias's son Jalen and his cousin Micah Rowan. Cassandra denied any personal connection when questioned publicly, dismissing their presence as an attempt to leverage her name. Yet that same evening, anonymous emails began arriving in her private inbox. Attached were archived permits bearing her digital signature, documents revealing accelerated timelines and structural shortcuts approved under her authority. Each file reopened a wound she had buried beneath expansion and accolades. The following day, the boys returned, standing silently across the street. Their new sign read, "Tell them what you did." As a news drone hovered above her estate and live footage began trending nationwide, Cassandra realized suppression might no longer be an option. The narrative surrounding Cassandra Vale fractured almost overnight. Financial networks framed her as a visionary entrepreneur whose developments revived declining districts, while independent outlets questioned whether revitalization had come at an unseen human cost. Headlines sharpened. Commentators debated her legacy. Into that widening divide stepped investigative journalist Harper Sloan, known for dismantling polished corporate myths with patient precision. Harper announced a multi-part series examining Vale Infrastructure's earliest contracts, beginning with the demolition of Redbrook Terrace. The timing felt deliberate, almost surgical. Investors responded first. Private calls flooded Cassandra's office, each one disguised as concern but rooted in fear. They wanted reassurance that no legal exposure existed, no reputational fracture that could destabilize quarterly projections. Cassandra projected composure, yet beneath her measured tone unease gathered. In an attempt to assert control, she terminated 2 senior security guards, citing mishandling of the boys at her gate. Officially, the decision reinforced protocol standards. Unofficially, it served as a subtle attempt to distance herself from the emotional discomfort their presence triggered. Authority felt easier than accountability. Meanwhile, Jalen Mercer and Micah Rowan declined every media request. They offered no speeches, no interviews, no accusations. Their silence unsettled the public more than any protest could. They continued standing across from the estate at intervals, their presence steady and restrained. Cassandra monitored them from behind glass and screens, aware that each image broadcast strengthened the moral tension building around her. Late one evening, she requested archived internal reports from the Redbrook redevelopment. Buried within digital files, she discovered a suppressed engineering memo that warned accelerated demolition schedules posed structural hazards to remaining tenants. The memo carried annotations recommending delay and reassessment. Her executive authorization overrode those recommendations. She studied her own digital signature, unable to recall whether she had consciously dismissed the warning or simply trusted senior advisors eager to meet investor timelines. The uncertainty fractured her confidence more than certainty would have. Grayson Holt advised a defamation strategy aimed at the boys' guardians, arguing that swift legal pressure could deter further allegations. For the first time in years, Cassandra rejected aggressive containment. Escalation felt like confirmation of guilt. As Harper Sloan uncovered documentation of Elias Mercer's safety complaints filed weeks before his death, public sentiment shifted. Commentators began asking whether Elias had been a whistleblower rather than a dissenter resistant to change. During a televised interview, Cassandra maintained composure until the name Redbrook Terrace surfaced. Her pause, brief yet visible, rippled across social media. Analysts replayed the hesitation repeatedly, interpreting vulnerability as implication. Soon after, an anonymous source leaked internal emails suggesting she had urged demolition teams to accelerate progress to satisfy early investors. The board convened an emergency meeting and quietly urged her to consider stepping aside temporarily. Amid the mounting scrutiny, a certified letter arrived at her office bearing Jalen Mercer's return address. Inside lay a copy of Elias's final notebook. The first page carried a single sentence written in steady handwriting. "Cassie, if you ever see this, it means you chose success over us." Cassandra chose to read Elias Mercer's notebook alone, long after the lights in her estate had dimmed, and the noise of speculation had softened into distant murmurs. She sat in her private study where awards and architectural models lined the shelves, symbols of control and permanence. The notebook felt fragile in her hands, its pages worn at the edges as if carried daily. Elias had written in careful detail about unsafe demolition procedures, community petitions that went unanswered, and meetings where residents pleaded for extensions. Interwoven through the documentation was something more personal: observations about Cassandra's growing distance, about the way ambition had slowly replaced familiarity in her voice. Elias did not write with bitterness, he wrote with concern. He described believing she had changed under pressure, not malice. He insisted that somewhere beneath the executive titles remained the girl who once promised to rebuild without displacement. Tucked midway through the notebook was a drafted speech he intended to deliver before the city council. In it, he defended Cassandra's character, arguing that she would never knowingly endanger her own community, and that if she understood the full consequences, she would intervene. The faith embedded in those words unsettled her more than accusation would have. Elias had never stopped believing in her integrity. As she turned each page, Cassandra confronted the misbelief that had guided her assent, that detachment equaled strength. She remembered the day she authorized the accelerated demolition order. Investors had questioned her resolve, hinting that hesitation would confirm suspicions that she was too emotionally tied to the project. She had felt the weight of expectation pressing against her reputation. Signing the order had seemed like proof that she could be decisive, that she was not soft. Now the memory felt less like strength and more like surrender to fear. Grayson Holt cautioned her against any public acknowledgement of fault, warning that even measured statements could trigger extensive lawsuits. Harper Sloan formally requested a comprehensive interview, offering Cassandra the opportunity to present her perspective before the investigative series concluded. The contrast between legal survival and moral truth sharpened into an unavoidable choice. Cassandra recognized another painful truth. She had never visited Redbrook Terrace after its demolition because she feared encountering displaced families whose eyes might reflect disappointment. When drone footage captured Jalen and Micah organizing a small memorial at the former Redbrook site, dozens of former residents gathered quietly. They held photographs and stood beneath newly constructed luxury balconies that overlooked ground once filled with familiar hallways. Cassandra watched remotely, her reflection faint against the screen. For the first time, she resisted the instinct to issue a cease and desist order. Instead, she instructed her team to arrange a private meeting with the boys. The decision unsettled her legal counsel, who threatened resignation should she admit wrongdoing publicly. Yet the first crack in her armor had already formed. On the eve of that meeting, a formal notification arrived confirming federal regulators had begun reviewing Vail Infrastructure's early redevelopment contracts. The meeting was arranged in a neutral downtown office far removed from the guarded gates of Cassandra Vail's estate and the polished lobby of her corporate headquarters. No cameras waited outside. No reporters lingered in hallways. The quiet neutrality of the space stripped away performance and left only consequence. Cassandra entered composed, dressed in understated gray, her posture controlled, yet the strain behind her eyes betrayed the weight she carried. Across the conference table sat Jalen Mercer and Micah Rowan, steady and self-possessed beyond their years. They did not begin with accusations. Instead, they placed a folder on the table containing copies of documents preserved in Elias Mercer's files, engineering memos, internal approvals, correspondence logs. The evidence was organized with calm precision. Cassandra reviewed the pages slowly, recognizing timestamps and digital authorization codes that traced back to her executive credentials. Each signature narrowed the distance between oversight and responsibility. The boys did not request compensation. They did not mention settlements. Their demand was singular and measured public acknowledgement of the truth. They wanted dignity restored to a story that had been reduced to statistics. As Cassandra listened, the emotional fracture widened. Jalen explained that Elias had attempted to schedule a meeting with her days before the collapse, hoping to present safety concerns directly. Corporate staff denied the request, categorizing it as non-essential interference. Cassandra absorbed the information without interruption, aware that even delegated decisions carried her authority. The room remained calm, yet the silence between them carried more weight than raised voices ever could. When the boys revealed they had already shared copies of the documents with Harper Sloan, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The investigative series would proceed regardless of her cooperation. The narrative would not wait for her readiness. For a moment, the instinct to contain, to strategize, to counterattack surfaced. Instead of yielding to it, Cassandra asked for time. Not to suppress the story, but to consider the response she owed. That evening, she drove alone to the former site of Redbrook Terrace. The neighborhood had been transformed into a polished complex of luxury condominiums carrying her company's name in steel lettering. Warm lights glowed from balconies. Families gathered in landscaped courtyards. Children rode scooters across paths where cracked pavement once ran. The development was undeniably beautiful, undeniably profitable. Yet standing there, Cassandra felt the absence more than the achievement. Progress had benefited many, but it had erased the place that shaped her earliest promises. For the first time, she acknowledged that wealth had insulated her from the human cost of acceleration. The distance she once called strength now felt like avoidance. Defensive logic began to give way to accountability, as city lights reflected off glass towers bearing her legacy. Cassandra made a decision that would reverberate far beyond boardrooms. Without informing her board of directors, she scheduled a live press conference for the following week, leaving the message she intended to deliver known only to herself. The board meeting convened under a tension that felt heavier than any quarterly review Cassandra Vale had ever faced. Directors who once praised her decisiveness now questioned her judgment. They warned that a live press conference without pre-approved language could trigger shareholder revolt and long-term market instability. Financial projections were laid out with clinical precision, each slide illustrating potential losses if she admitted liability. Grayson Holt, who had stood beside her for years as head of security, quietly stated that if she proceeded with a public confession, he would be forced to resign to protect his professional credibility. Cassandra listened without interruption, absorbing the calculated fear behind every objection. When asked directly whether she would cancel the press conference, she declined with steady resolve. In the days leading up to the announcement, stock prices began fluctuating in visible anticipation. Analysts speculated across networks, and Harper Sloan publicly suggested that Cassandra might acknowledge involvement in the Redbrook demolition controversy. Federal regulators intensified their inquiries, requesting additional documentation tied to early redevelopment contracts. What had begun as a contained controversy now carried federal weight. Cassandra consulted independent legal experts who confirmed that voluntary disclosure could result in substantial financial penalties. Billions were at risk, along with her position, her reputation, and the empire she had built from nothing. Alone in her office overlooking Manhattan's skyline, Cassandra reflected on Elias Mercer's unwavering belief in her integrity. He had defended her character even when evidence suggested she had changed. She understood that preserving authority by denying truth would fracture something more permanent than corporate structure. It would fracture the last remaining piece of the person she once promised to be. The realization stripped away the final layer of hesitation. When the press conference began, cameras flashed with expectant intensity. Cassandra approached the podium without teleprompter assistance, holding a prepared statement she had rewritten repeatedly. Instead of deflecting responsibility toward advisors or procedural complexity, she acknowledged that she had approved accelerated demolition timelines without fully investigating documented safety objections. She accepted moral responsibility for negligence in oversight. The admission moved through the room with visible shock, reshaping the narrative in real time. She then announced the creation of a voluntary compensation and housing restoration fund for displaced Redbrook families, financed significantly through her personal assets. More notably, she committed to rebuilding affordable housing on adjacent land under independent community governance, relinquishing direct corporate control over the project. The decision marked a deliberate surrender of power in favor of accountability. Investor reactions were immediate and severe. Market value dipped sharply. Within hours, the board initiated an emergency vote to remove her as CEO pending further review. As directors cast their votes electronically, Cassandra stood alone in her office, city lights flickering beyond glass walls, waiting to discover whether she still controlled the empire she had just transformed through confession. The board's decision arrived before sunrise. Cassandra Vale was formally removed as acting CEO pending the outcome of regulatory investigations. The announcement circulated through financial media within minutes, framed as both consequence and cautionary tale. Analysts predicted long-term damage to Vail Infrastructure's valuation, suggesting investor confidence would take years to recover. Commentators debated whether her confession represented courage or corporate miscalculation. Public humiliation followed in predictable waves, yet beneath the scrutiny Cassandra felt an unexpected steadiness. Losing control of the company unsettled her, but it did not wound her the way silence would have. For the first time in years, integrity felt heavier than influence, and she chose to carry it. Harper Sloan's feature published days later presented a measured account of Cassandra's admission and the corrective measures she had initiated. The article neither absolved nor condemned her. It acknowledged negligence while recognizing voluntary accountability. Public opinion, once sharply divided, began to soften at its edges. Conversations shifted from outrage alone to cautious curiosity about whether meaningful repair could follow confession. The first community planning session for the new housing initiative convened in a modest civic hall near the former Redbrook site. Jalen Mercer and Micah Rowan attended not as protesters but as organizing members. Cassandra entered without executive title or corporate entourage. She took a seat among residents who had once viewed her as architect of their displacement. She spoke only when invited, offering logistical resources and financial commitments rather than directives. The Restoration Trust was funded primarily through her personal fortune, a decision that significantly reduced her net worth. Federal regulators imposed substantial fines but declined criminal charges, citing her voluntary disclosure and cooperation. The penalties were steep, yet they clarified consequence without erasing opportunity for reform. As weeks progressed, former Redbrook residents began to see Cassandra less as a distant mogul and more as a flawed neighbor attempting repair. When community leaders voted to rename the Restoration Project the Mercer Initiative in honor of Elias, Cassandra did not object. The name carried weight, anchoring the effort in memory rather than branding. She understood that redemption was not a strategic campaign but a sustained willingness to remain present after the headlines faded. Resistance emerged nonetheless. A rival developer quietly petitioned city officials to block zoning approval for the affordable housing plan, citing economic concerns and regulatory technicalities. Cassandra used her remaining influence within planning commissions to counter the obstruction, not through dominance but through coalition. She worked alongside Jalen and Micah, securing community votes and transparent endorsements that reinforced public support. The initiative began to resemble shared stewardship rather than corporate control. On the morning zoning approval was scheduled for final confirmation, an anonymous lawsuit was filed seeking to halt construction indefinitely, casting uncertainty over everything Cassandra had relinquished to rebuild. The anonymous lawsuit landed like a final attempt to exhaust what little stability remained around the Mercer Initiative. It alleged financial mismanagement and procedural irregularities, questioning whether the Restoration Trust had the competence to oversee redevelopment responsibly. Headlines reignited skepticism. Opponents suggested Cassandra Vail's involvement tainted the project beyond repair. Yet as legal teams traced the funding behind the complaint, evidence surfaced linking it to a rival development firm seeking market advantage by delaying affordable housing expansion in the district. The revelation did not erase tension, but it reframed the conflict as competition rather than corruption. Cassandra chose to testify publicly before the Zoning Commission, fully aware that returning to the spotlight risked permanent exclusion from elite corporate circles that had once defined her identity. Standing before city officials and community members, she did not defend her reputation. She defended the structure of accountability built into the initiative. She outlined transparent financial audits, independent oversight boards, and legally binding anti-displacement protections designed to prevent the repetition of Redbrook's mistakes. Her voice carried neither defiance nor apology alone, but a measured acknowledgement of consequence paired with commitment to reform. Community members followed her testimony with statements of their own. Former residents spoke about loss, but also about the visible change in her approach. Jalen Mercer described the initiative not as compensation, but as shared stewardship. Micah Rowan outlined the mentorship programs funded through the trust, aimed at ensuring neighborhood youth gained opportunities without abandoning their roots. Their presence shifted the atmosphere from adversarial to collaborative. When the zoning approval vote concluded in favor of the Mercer Initiative, a quiet exhale moved through the chamber. Construction began within weeks, designed as mixed-income housing governed by enforceable protections against displacement. The project carried no corporate branding beyond its name honoring Elias Mercer. Offers from select board members inviting Cassandra to resume leadership roles within Vale Infrastructure reached her discreetly, framed as pragmatic reconciliation. She declined them. Leading the initiative independently required fewer headlines and more humility, but it aligned with the person she was becoming. Her financial empire had diminished, yet her purpose expanded in ways that balance sheets could not measure. Jalen and Micah assumed oversight of youth mentorship programs operating within the restored community. At the former Redbrook site, a new mural rose across a brick facade, replicating the words, "We rise together." Cassandra visited at dawn before construction crews arrived, standing quietly before the artwork. Wealth had once symbolized escape from vulnerability. Now responsibility defined her legacy. She had not remembered her promise in time to prevent harm, but she remembered it before repair became impossible. As children eventually filled the restored courtyard with motion and laughter, unaware of the negotiations that secured their stability, Cassandra remained present. The future carried uncertainty, yet this time she chose not to retreat behind walls. If this story moved something in you, let that feeling travel beyond this screen. Stories like this only matter when they are carried forward, reflected on, and shared with others who need to hear them. Stay connected for more narratives that challenge power, question choices, and explore redemption in unexpected places. And before you leave, consider this carefully. If success demanded your silence but truth threatened everything you built, which one would you protect, and what would that choice say about who you truly are?